Hello, everyone. I'm Penryn. I lead developer relations at Worldcoin, focusing on building with World ID, and I'm here to talk about global proof of personhood in the age of AI. So who in here has heard of Worldcoin before? Quite a few of you, all right. And how many of you have ever built something using World ID? I see 2 hands, which makes me very happy. So, in this talk, I'll go over what World ID is, what World ID does and what it doesn't do, why Worldcoin created World ID, what you should do with World ID, and how you integrate it into your app and can grab your slice of the $20,000 worth of bounties that we have for all the hackers here. So, to start, World ID is here to solve one big question. How do you know who or what is a real and unique person, right? It's really, really tough to know who's a real person, and solving the Sybil problem is a huge issue for Web3 and even in Web 2 as well. It's a useful problem for all of tech, but the solution has its roots here in Web 3. So to solve that problem, we have World ID. It's private, inclusive, and robust, right? Those 3 things are super important because we want as little information as possible about which real human you are, which is a big issue with a lot of other ways that you prove you're human. We want it to be inclusive so that as much of humanity as possible can be a part of the system to prove that they're human, and we want it to be robust to ensure that one person gets one identity in World ID, and you can't have multiple accounts per person. So with past ways we looked at having proofs of personhood, we looked at email and phone, which I've got multiple emails, I've got multiple phone numbers. Not that great of a solution, but is a step beyond just they have an account. We looked at doing KYC on official IDs, but that's very invasive. You're giving up a lot of information about your identity. And less than half of the world has a digitally verifiable identity. So it's not inclusive enough for what we want to do. We looked at webs of trust, but the issue with the web of trust is that every jump further away from that initial core set you are, the less powerful that proof of humanity is. And every implementation of a web of trust so far has had too small of an initial set. And that leaves us with biometrics, which might initially sound invasive, but I'll tell you how we managed to do it in a way that isn't. We looked at a lot of different ways in order to do biometric verification of humanness and uniqueness. Fingerprints and palm scans and face scans were some that we looked at initially. And while those might be good for letting you log into your phone, telling if this person presenting themselves now is the same as this person who presented themselves at sign-up is a different problem than determining if this person presenting themselves now is different from every person who's presented themselves to this system before. Touch ID and Face ID on your phone can distinguish about 1 in 30 million people. We need to be able to distinguish 1 in a billion people, right? We also looked at DNA, which highly invasive. It tells you a lot about who a person is. You can determine things like race and sex from that, for example, and that's not what we want. So we settled on iris scans, right? It has a high enough level of entropy to determine 1 in a billion people. It's been highly studied. And additionally, the iris scans that we do make it very hard to passively capture that data, right? People talk about face tracking where, if you're just walking down a street and there's a scanner, it can scan your face. But iris scanning requires a level of attention, which means it requires a level of consent. No one can passively scan your iris in the way that Worldcoin can. And when it comes to that iris scanning, there's a couple different ways that we looked at doing that. We looked at phone sensors, we looked at off-the-shelf hardware, but phone sensors didn't have enough resolution. They couldn't get enough data to distinguish in the 1 in a billion people that we need. Off-the-shelf hardware wasn't trusted enough, it was clunky, it didn't suit our needs exactly, so we settled on building custom hardware, which no one really wants to do. I find it fun personally, but it is like a very tough process. So we settled on the orb. And I have a clear orb here that if anyone wants to look closer at it later, you can. All of the hardware is also open source. And the orb has been in development for a few years. We've gone through lots of different revisions of how we can scan more effectively, more securely. And with the orb, it does a couple things. It makes sure you're real. It makes sure that you're an actual human presented in front of it, not a photo of a human, for example. It checks your iris code is unique. So on the orb device, an iris code is calculated from the photos of your irises taken at the orb. Those photos never have to be stored anywhere. They can be deleted from the orb. If you choose to have them stored, it's entirely opt-in. And if you have them stored, it means that if we upgrade the algorithms in the future, you don't need to be rescanned, but again, entirely opt-in. And with this process, it verifies your World ID, your self-custodial identity, currently available in the World app, which is the app that Worldcoin has created and put out into the world. World ID is sort of like a global digital identity, or it is a global digital identity protocol. It's somewhat like an internet passport, right? You have your proof of personhood credentials. Right now, you can verify yourself at the orb. We consider that to be the gold standard. It's a very strong proof of humanness. Or you can verify with a phone number if an orb isn't available in your region, for example. And in the future, we'll be adding support for more forms of these proof of personhood credentials. For us, this proof of personhood is a spectrum, right? It's not you are a human or you aren't a human. It's how likely is it that you're a human? How sure can we be that you're a human? So, for example, if someone's phone verified with World ID, perhaps you give them $1 of free credit, whereas if they're orb verified, you give them $10 in free credit. We designed World ID to be privacy first, decentralized, and open source. Worldcoin has to collect no identifying information about who you are. Your phone number is not required. We never ask for your email. We have nothing about your name or who you are. Decentralizing is an important part of what we're doing. While orb verification is something controlled by Worldcoin, at the moment, we are going to be opening up the protocol to other companies' forms of humanist verification in the future. And it's open source. IDKit, our front-end widget, is open source. Our smart contracts are open source. And for the things that aren't yet open source, we are always working to open source them when we can. And there's a lot of different things you can use World ID for. It's really useful to know that a user is a unique human in a lot of different circumstances. Voting is a great example. You can make sure that one person gets one vote instead of one wallet address gets one vote or one token gets one vote. You can have a very fair system. For social media, everyone wants to know who's a real human and who's not. We've all seen what's happened with Twitter and how Twitter Blue and verification has changed drastically. But a system where this is a unique human behind this account. But they can still be an anonymous account. They don't have to give up their real identity. You just know it's a real human. Customer incentives, I already talked about. You can give a little bit of free credit for someone who has a lighter proof of personhood, or a lot more free credit to someone who's been orb verified. Events, you want to know that it's real humans signing up and not bots. Tons of different use cases, and if anyone wants to talk about what your use case might be in the hackathon, I'm happy to chat with you at our booth after this talk. And we designed World ID to be super easy to integrate, both for Web 2 and Web 3 use cases. You can use World ID on the web, you can use World ID on your mobile device, you can use World ID on-chain. And there's two main ways to use it. You have sign in with Worldcoin and anonymous actions. Let's start with sign in with Worldcoin. So who here has used ChatGPT before? All right, I see a few hands. I think it's actually more people than raise their hands, but I won't say anything. And when you sign into ChatGPT, it uses Auth0, right? So you can sign in with your email, or sign in with Google, or sign in with your Microsoft account, and very shortly, you could potentially, hopefully, sign in with Worldcoin. When you sign in with Worldcoin, you tap the button, and it takes you to our page. You see a QR code. It's very simple. You scan that QR code from your phone. You can go in the camera app, or you can scan it from the World app, and it pulls up this modal that asks you to approve your sign-in. It tells you what you're signing into, if it's a verified app, and then you're signed in. Now, if you want to integrate sign-in with Worldcoin, there's a bunch of different ways. Auth0, as I mentioned. There's NextAuth. You can use the OIDC well-known file with another provider, build out custom OIDC flows. But for now, let's focus on how you would integrate it with NextAuth. This is all you need to integrate World ID with NextAuth. When you configure your NextAuth provider, all you have to do is fill in this information, set the World ID application ID and your client secret from the OIDC provider, and then it works. It's super simple. NextAuth has made this incredibly easy, and this is all it takes in order to integrate sign in with Worldcoin into your app with NextAuth. Specifically, if you're interested in using sign in with Worldcoin, we have a $3,000 bounty for the best sign in with Worldcoin use case. And now let's talk a little bit about anonymous actions. Anonymous actions are a little bit more complex than sign in with Worldcoin. Anonymous actions let you prove that you're a unique human doing something once with a specific signal, although the signal is only supported on-chain. So what does this mean? When you do an anonymous action, you get that verification that a user's human, and you get to know which verification method they've used, if they're phone or orb verified. You get to know that they're doing something once, because every time the same user takes that same action, it will generate the same nullifier hash. That nullifier hash is sort of that unique identifier for that combination of user and action. And the signal for on-chain use cases is part of that zero-knowledge proof generated on a user's device that will make sure that the information they wanted is part of that proof. That can be their signal in a vote, who they're voting for or what they're voting for, or if they're claiming an airdrop, that can be their wallet address. It ensures that that is part of the proof and hasn't been tampered with. So to integrate sign in with Worldcoin, everything starts with ID Kit. So ID Kit is the component you can use in your React front end. And this is all you need. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. This slide is not supposed to be in here. Sorry. It all starts with ID Kit. ID Kit is this modal, right? The one where the user scans the QR code. This is all it takes to integrate ID Kit. It's one component. You have to pass it your action name, your app ID, the function that you want to call once a user's verification has been returned to your app. That's on success. Handle verify is optional, but I can explain a little bit more about that later. And you give it which credential types you want to accept for this. So you can limit it to only people who are orb verified, only people who are phone verified, or people who have either one. You have a single button that opens ID Kit, and on your front end, that's quite easy. But you have this response from ID Kit that gets passed back to your app. Your Merkle root is saying which Merkle root that user has been validated within. The nullifier hash, again, is that unique identifier of that user and action combo. The proof is this very long hexadecimal string from Semaphore that actually is the zero-knowledge proof, and as well you get the credential type they're verified with. But you have to do something with this. Just having someone verified on the front end alone is not enough to know that they're a real human, because people can manipulate things in the front end. You still have to verify the proof. You still have to verify the proof. You still have to verify the proof. I want to make that super clear, because if you don't verify that proof anywhere, you're not eligible for the bounties and you haven't integrated ID Kit correctly. I just want to make it abundantly clear that you have to verify that proof. And how do you do that? So one way you can do that is verifying it with the Worldcoin API. We have an endpoint, the API v1 verify endpoint with your app ID at the end of that. You simply pass it all of the information that you got from that, from ID Kit, that Merkle root, that nullifier hash, that proof, and the credential type. And then you'll get a response from our API that says, yes, this user verified, or it will return an error code indicating why they weren't verified. That can be that the Merkle root was invalid. That can be that they've already verified for this action before. In the developer portal, for the API verifications, you can set an arbitrary number of times you want to let a user perform a certain action. You know, oftentimes that'll be a single time you want to let them do that. Sometimes that'll be an unlimited number of times you want to let them do that. But if you want to let a user do something 3 times, say you're a social media platform and you want a user to be able to have, you know, a doxed account, an anonymous account, and, you know, a third account just for whatever they want, you can let them verify up to 3 accounts, but only 3 accounts. But what I'm sure most of you are interested in is how to verify proofs on-chain in your hackathon projects. So when you want to do on-chain verification, you have to instantiate the World ID instance. So you pass it the address of the World ID contracts. We have ENS addresses or ENS domains that resolve to those. You can find those in our documentation. And then your app ID and action ID. So then you have to create the external nullifier by encoding and hashing the action ID and app ID together. And then you have that instantiated. And then to actually verify that proof, you call the verify proof function on our smart contract. You pass the Merkle root, the group ID, which will be 0 if you want to check if a user's phone verified, or 1 if you want to check if a user is orb verified. You give it the encoded and hashed signal if you want to. If you aren't looking to use a signal, you can leave that as an empty string. You give it the nullifier hash, the external nullifier, and the proof. And then it will revert if the user cannot validate, if they've already, if any part of that doesn't validate properly. But if you want Sybil resistance for your Web3 on-chain verification, you have to handle that yourself. And we see that here. So if the nullifier hash is already in the list of nullifier hashes, we revert because we know that they've already performed this before. But if the proof verifies, the next thing we do is add that nullifier hash to that list of nullifier hashes so that we basically check the box that, yes, they've done this action before. So for the hackathon, as I said, we have $20,000 in prizes. We have $5,000 to the best overall project, $3,000 to the best governance use case, $3,000 to the most creative use case, $3,000 to the best sign-in with Worldcoin app, 3 $1,000 honorable mentions, and a $3,000 prize pool for any project that properly integrates World ID or sign-in with Worldcoin. So our SDK is currently still invite-only. If you'd like to get access now, please scan this QR code or go to the link on your computer. If you don't grab this now, you can also come ask at our booth. And then I'll give everyone a minute to scan it who wants to. I still see a few more phones. All right. And then at worldcoin.org/soul23, you can see a Notion page that we've compiled with lots of information and resources about what we're doing here at ETH Seoul. So you can see the bounties there. There's links to our starter kits, both for on-chain and off-chain use cases, all our documentation, blog posts that dive further into how World ID works, and our FAQ. And that is how to integrate World ID. So I figure I'd also give you all a quick demo that should hopefully work. We did just update our simulator. So for production use cases, right? Actually, perhaps I should start with the developer portal. So the developer portal is at developer.worldcoin.org. You have to sign in with Worldcoin for this. I don't have a cable to connect my phone to my computer, otherwise I would put it up on the screen as well. But to sign in with Worldcoin, all I have to do is scan this QR code. It opens up the modal within the app, as I showed earlier. It's waiting for my phone to finish. I just tap verify with World ID. Proof is generated on my device, sent over to the ID kit front end, and we are now logged in. So with the developer portal, I can create an app. I can just name this Soul Demo. The description is optional, but there's 2 things you have to choose here. You have to choose if it's staging or production. So if it's a staging app, proofs will only validate if they come from the simulator, which you can find at simulator.worldcoin.org, or production apps, which will only validate with proofs from the app, the World app on a user's device. So we'll go with a staging app, and then we have to select cloud or on-chain. So cloud actions you verify with the API, Or if you want to do sign in with Worldcoin, you'll also create a cloud app. On chain, you can only validate on chain. So we'll go with a cloud staging app, for example. I'll create this new app, and then from there, I have to create an action. So I'll create a new action. Let's just say verify at ETH Seoul. You have to give a description that explains what you're asking users to verify in order to do. So let's just say test here. It creates your action identifier. This is what you will pass to IDKit and pass on chain. And then you can select how many verifications you want to allow. So I can say up to 5, I can say 100, but for this, let's just go with unique, only letting a user verify once. So I create my action. Why is it not working here? Let's see if it didn't like how short my description is. All right, let's refresh the page and try again. And now we've created an action. So if I wanted to go ahead and integrate this into my app, I just have to set the app ID and action ID in my environment variables. So you can do that in your local.env file. You can do that in your Vercel environment. Basically, that just has to make sure it gets into IDKit. So I put together a brief demonstration of using World ID for an off-chain use case. I wanted to let people claim a free item from a Shopify store, and they get a more valuable item if they're verified with an orb, or a cheaper item if they're verified with their phone. So let's see if the simulator is working properly. Once IDKit comes up, if you're testing with the simulator, you can actually just click on the QR code to copy that. To get that over to the simulator, you'll insert your QR code manually, paste that in there, hit submit. This has been sitting here for a bit, so I bet I just need to refresh the simulator. Or do I need to log out and start from the beginning? Well, let's start from the beginning in the simulator. So when you start from the beginning, right now the only chain that the simulator works on is Polygon Mumbai, but as we will be transitioning to Optimism in the near future, very shortly you'll be able to also do this on Optimism. So I can either generate a persistent ID where I would sign in with a wallet, but for this, I took myself back to where I was. For this, we will create a temporary ID. So I click this, it takes a second, but it will take me into the simulator. And I'm not verified right now. I am not verified with the phone, I'm not verified at the orb. So I can click verify my identity. Let's start with phone number verification. So I click verify, this is a fake phone number, but now you can see that I'm phone verified. So if we take this QR code and insert it here, this might not work because it typically takes a couple minutes for that identity to be inserted on chain in order for the verification to work. But I have put in the QR code. I'm going to verify with the phone. It knows that the verification hasn't been put in yet. I'm going to try continue anyway and see if it works. It appears that it did, but the success is just called once IDKit has returned everything properly. This does not mean that the proof is verified on the back end yet. So if I click here, it appears that it did not work, unfortunately. That's all right. I can show you another example of what it does look like when it works properly. So we go to try it out in the docs. And let's do a staging app. Let's separate these tabs, and we'll open up the simulator in split view here. For the action, let's just say ETH Seoul. We want to accept phone credentials. Continue with Worldcoin. Oh, we need to update ID kit in the docs because it doesn't have the click for the QR code, unfortunately. That's unfortunate. Let's go with production just so I can demo this on my phone again. Let's go with orb verification because I am orb verified on my phone. I scan. It's waiting on my phone. Verify with World ID, and it's successful. So that's a brief overview of how you can use the simulator or how you can test it out in the documentation. In the docs, there's lots of information about World ID overall, how to use ID Kit specifically, how to use our API, how to do things on chain. And as always, if you have any other questions, you can reach out to me at our booth here. You can reach out in the Worldcoin Discord. And yeah, I'm always here to help you build on World ID here at the hackathon. Thank you.